The following is an encore presentation of stories from the Dooralong Transformation Centre. And joining us in the studio this morning is Sam. Sam is from Dooralong, so very good morning to you, Sam.
Good morning to you too, Phil.
Thanks. You're at Dooralong. How long have you been there, Sam?
Nearly on 6.5 months.
So you're coming towards the end of your programme, I guess?
Yeah, pretty much the end of my program now.
Oh, yeah, so hopefully out for Christmas?
Fingers crossed? So. Fingers crossed, yeah.
Yeah, oh, that'd be good. So you've been there 6.5 months, so it's taken a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's taken a while. Like, I was in the psych ward before I went to Dooralong, so that's where my journey started, was in the psych ward, then led to me to Dooralong.
So, yeah, so the one followed the other. You're in that psychiatric unit, and then more or less straight away into Dooralong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you're a young guy, Sam, but, you know, when did things start to go wrong for you?
Well, I left home at 14 and started hanging around the wrong people and started leading me to drugs, and that's where my addiction started on cannabis.
Yeah.
Then I met up with my father, which I didn't know, at 16, and that's when my amphetamine habit started, taking speed, and then I was off that for a while, and then started hanging around the wrong people again. Like, I was still on the cannabis, and I was hanging around some older boys, and that's where my ice habit started. So
14, that's young, isn't it? You left home at... what did you say? You left home at 14? Yeah. So childhood wasn't idyllic. It wasn't, you know, a super happy childhood then.
No, I wasn't the best, but like, I didn't have my dad in my life, and that's who I wanted, and I just kept fighting, and my mum said, you know, rah, he's not here.
Yeah.
And I thought my dad was dead, so I kept fighting with my mum, where's my dad, and she didn't want to explain to me, and now I understand why, because he was in blowing addiction as well.
So she was trying to shield you and protect you from him, really?
Yeah, which is understandable now, I realise.
Yeah, but at the time, you just wanted to see your dad?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you left home when you're 14. Where did you go to?
I went to my older brother's house.
Yeah.
I stayed on the street for 3 nights.
Yeah.
And then I went and see my older brother and asked if I could stay there because I didn't want to go back to mum's because it was just drama. And he's like, yeah, you can stay here. And then I moved in with my other older brother. We got a house together, and I ran away from that situation and got on the drugs hard.
Yeah. So you were on the streets for 3 days?
Yeah.
Yeah. Scary?
Oh, I was living under the bridge at Taree for 3 days, and it was probably the scariest moment of my life because I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. So it's scary from a safety point of view as well? Or not?
Oh, a safety point of view was I was hiding under a bridge. Like, I wasn't knowing what would happen at night. Like,
yeah.
There was a lot of people walking around the streets, and I was hiding in the bushes.
Yeah. And you were 14 at the time?
Yeah, no, I was 14.
And then you went to live with your brother?
I went and lived with my brother, and it was going good for a couple of months. I was still smoking cannabis in the room, sneaking it around. And he found out, and we had an argument, and that's when I took off again.
Where were you getting the cannabis from?
I was on Centrelink at 14, on living away from home allowance. I was paying him $150 rent, and was spending the rest on cannabis.
Yeah.
And getting it off friends' dads and that.
Yeah. So, freely available?
Yeah.
Easy to get hold of?
Oh, it was pretty easy, yeah, at that age, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you sort of move in with your brother, and then things sort of break down a little bit, and then you take off again.
Yeah.
So what happens next, Sam?
Well, I took off to Orange, to a friend's house again, and I was still in addiction, still smoking cannabis, and then next thing you know, I met a girl, and that's where my addiction got worse because she cheated on me, and I started hitting the pot even harder. I moved back to Taree, and I found my dad in a shopping centre. He goes, I'm your dad, rah. And that's where my addiction was, into amphetamines, interstate truck driver. He was on the gas 24/7 to keep him up. And that's where my addiction led even more to amphetamines. I turned 18 and had an ice habit, smoking ice every day, trying to keep myself up.
And it was your dad that introduced you to ice?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel about that now? How do you feel about your dad?
Well, now he isn't on anything because he's realised I'm in here. Like, it's led my family back together, which is to the grace of God, like, that's happened. But at the end of the day, like, I'll always have that picture of him giving me my first amphetamine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've got to put boundaries in place for my life with my dad.
Exactly right. And anybody else that's doing sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you were desperate to see your dad. You were longing to see your dad. your mum was trying to shield you from him. You did eventually meet up with him, and he did what your mum feared that he would do. He introduced you to ice.
That's what I ended up doing.
Yeah. We hear so many scary stories of ice, and we see those pictures that sometimes appear on TV or in the newspaper of before and after shots of people before they were on ice and after. And the after shots always somebody really gaunt and really almost dirty and unkempt looking with scabs over their faces. I mean, is that what happens?
Well, I can say it did happen to me. Like, there's some people that won't get the after effects, but some people will. Like, I had scabs on my body, all over my face. I dropped 20 kilos within a month and a half. I was down to 65 kilos. Now I'm 90 again. And that's the gifts of recovery for me. Like, I'm myself again. I pray to my higher power each morning when I wake up, and I just live the day by it comes.
To drop to 64, because you're quite tall. How tall are you?
6'1".
6'1", and you dropped to 64 kilo.
Yeah, underweight.
Yeah, and you have all these scabs. What did you think when you were looking at yourself in the mirror each morning?
I thought I was good. I was just waiting for that next hit.
You couldn't see the bad side. You couldn't see these scabs, or if you could, they just didn't register with you.
No, I was in denial.
Yeah. What about the people around you? Were they saying, Sam, something's not right here, mate?
They were saying I was on it, and I was like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm not going to that life, in denial, lying constantly, and until I realised myself before I went into the psychiatric ward, like, I got a problem, I need to tell you, look, I'm on ice. I didn't tell my mum I was on ice because I didn't want her thinking, oh, he's going downhill. So I put myself in the psychiatric ward, and I was living with my cousin at the time, and he's like, you're on it. I was like, no, I'm not, just smoking heaps of pot, And I went into the psych ward and I said, I've been on ice for the last 4 weeks. I've had 2 hours sleep within that, and that's where my problem was. I was full into drug-induced psychosis.
It's not only you started with cannabis and move on to ice. It's like, stepping up into a different league, really. But it's also that much more expensive. So, when we hear lots of, stories of, and guys from Dooralong have admitted to us and told us and explained to us, is a better way of putting it, how they really do anything to get the money to buy the next ice. It's got such a grip on them that it can lead to crime. Were you ever tempted in that way?
Well, at first I led to crime. I was stealing items to get my gear. Then I started making more money, and that's when I got a job and got more money, and I started selling drugs to keep my addiction going, and that's where it led from there, and I started smoking more and more every day.
Do you think about that now, that you were selling drugs? Does that concern you? Or do you feel, now that you have a relationship with God, your higher power, that that was a previous Sam, that was a different Sam?
That's the old me. Like, today I won't even look at drugs. I won't go back to them because I've got God in my life, and He's keeping me clean today. Yeah.
You mentioned, and we'll have a break for music after we've sort of looked at this aspect, but you mentioned you booked yourself into a psych ward. Things must have been really, really bad for you to actually go to a psychiatric ward and say, admit me, please. What was life like for you then? What was a typical day for you before you booked yourself into the psych ward?
Well, I was living with my cousin and his 3 kids, and I was at the back, and I was hearing voices, and I felt like the trees were talking to me, and I was hitting them, I was kicking them, screaming at the top of my lungs, and neighbours were looking at me like, look at this Fruit Loop. And I knew I had a problem. Like, I was yelling at the top of my lungs. It was either that, or I was probably going to lead to jails, deaths and institutes as it comes.
So you had this, what the medical people call this psychosis. This is hearing voices in your head, real voices.
Yeah.
Telling you to do things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that you went for, you weren't getting much sleep.
I was up for days on end.
Yeah.
Because I was just keep on smoking and smoking and smoking.
What about food? Were you taking,
I'd have food when I thought I needed food.
Yeah. But life was revolving around the next fix,
It was for the next fix, yeah.
Yeah. So can you remember, how do you go about booking yourself into a psych ward? What do you do? Do you just roll up and...
Well, I rang the mental health line, and they said, you got a drama, can you please get into Tari Hospital ASAP? And I got in there. I got my mum to drop me in there, and that's when they put me in the psychiatric ward for 2.5 months.
Would it take quite a bit of courage to ring the mental health unit, knowing that, to admit it's difficult enough in this culture to admit that you have a mental health issue, but you've actually started ringing the mental health unit saying, look, admit me to a psychiatric ward. That would have taken quite a bit of courage.
Yeah, it did. It was hard, but I knew I had a problem and I needed to fix it.
Yeah, so you were self-aware enough to know that, hang on, this can't go on, this is wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just before that music break, Sam was telling us of his battles with initially cannabis, and then how it graduated to ice after his father had introduced it to him. He then very bravely, courageously admitted himself to a psychiatric unit because he was hearing voices in his head, and he was diagnosed. What were you diagnosed with, Sam?
Drug-induced psychosis, schizophrenia.
Yeah. Now, is that a permanent thing? I mean, schizophrenia sounds like a bit of a diagnosis that might affect you all your life.
Well, I got told it was going to be a 50-50 chance that I could get rid of it. And 3 months ago, I overcome everything, and I'm off my medication now, which is great. But at first, I didn't think I'd be able to overcome it. I didn't think I was going to lose the voices in my head.
So there was you were facing the possibility at one time when you were in the psych ward that these voices, these horrible voices that were telling you to do all these terrible things, that they might be with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I was a bit paranoid about it at first, but I said I can overcome this. I started praying, and that's how I got into Dooralong, was praying each day as well, because I knew I had a problem with my addiction.
Yeah. And just to draw back a little bit as well, we, again, when people talk about drugs and they're just recreational drugs, and then the medics come on and some say, yes, but some leads to drug-induced psychosis, and you can, this is true, isn't it?
Yeah.
It does. So, look, it's not for me to preach to people out there, but what would you say, Sam, you're in a much better position to me. What would you say to somebody who's just sort of started to experiment with drugs and thinks all these stories about, psychosis and hearing voices is just a scare thing to stop you taking drugs?
Well, I'd at least tell them number one priority is get a higher power, try and get to meetings, like there's meeting lists for NA on the internet to get some help, like with older participants that have already done program before me, that have got like 30-40 years clean. Talk to someone that isn't on drugs so that you can get some help. Ring a mental health line. Try and get into a rehab facility if you can, like the Transformation Centre at Dooralong, the number one. That's the best one I've heard, and all the boys out there at the moment are saying, it's the best.
Yeah.
So
just reach out for help.
Yeah, reach out for help, because one pipe leads to your life. That's how I look at it now.
And like you say, you mentioned NA, that's Narcotics Anonymous, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you've got an alcohol addiction, there's AA as well.
Yeah, so get on the web, and they've got Australian sites, and there would be local meetings, I guess, in most parts of Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so, right, you're in the psychiatric ward. You've been given a 50-50 chance at these voices, the psychosis. It could be permanent, 50% chance it may not be. Thankfully, you were in the 50% that it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we know from what you were saying earlier that the next step along your journey was Dooralong, but who introduced you to Dooralong?
There was a young lady in the town that I was living at, and then she explained to me like about Dooralong, and I was like, yeah, I need help. And that's when my family started ringing Dooralong, and when I got out of the psychiatric ward for 2 weeks, I kept ringing Dooralong every day, and I got told it was going to be a 3-month waiting list. So I started ringing other facilities to try and get in as soon as I can. Within a week, I got a phone call from Barry that's out at Dooralong saying, can you come in next week, have your detox? And I said, I've been in a psychiatric ward for 2.5 months, like I'm ready to come now. And he goes, well, can you meet me at Oasis at 9 o'clock Monday morning? And Monday morning come, and I was there.
That's really quite amazing, because most people, if you're a regular listener, you will know that there's usually a 2 or 3 month waiting list to get into Dooralong, but you more or less move seamlessly from the psychiatric ward straight to Dooralong.
Yeah, 2.5 weeks at home.
How do you think life would have turned out differently for you if you had to have that 2 or 3 month gap between leaving the psychiatric ward and going to Dooralong?
I don't know, it could have went either way. I could have stayed clean, or I could have been back in blowing addiction, and I really can't say, because my frame of mind at the time was I was going to go for my next hit.
Is that right?
And the first 3 weeks of induction, my mind was still out the gate, like I need to get out and go back to addiction, but the grace of God kept me there.
So if you had been subjected to that waiting list, you might have gone back to, there's a high chance you would have gone back to the drugs, and who knows, it could have, led to people. We hear about people taking their lives. Who knows what it could have happened?
Jails, deaths, or institutes. So I look at it like now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you go down to the Oasis Centre in Wyong. You get picked up by somebody in a bus. You're driving out to Dooralong. What are you thinking as you're driving it down the valley there?
Well, I was looking at my phone at first, and I was like, no service, no Facebook.
That's right. Yeah, where am I?
And like I was just starting to get connections with my family, and like I thought, wow, I got no service, not going to be able to ring up. They probably don't have any service out here, like.
Yeah.
And well, now I don't even use my phone at Dooralong. When I first got there, I'd be on a rail trying to get on Facebook, trying to message everyone. And now
that's the rail outside the chapel.
Yeah,
it's the only place you can get service
with Optus. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got to be with Optus. But now you're not into the social media. No.
I just want my recovery and get my life on track.
Yeah. So how would you say life has changed for you? What are you doing differently in your life that you've been introduced to now that you're at Dooralong?
Well, of a morning I wake up and I pray for 5 to 10 minutes and lay in bed praying to God to keep me clean and to keep me alive. Well, I never went to the gym on the outside. I go to the gym every morning, then I go to my groups. And after the groups, I sit down and journal about what I've done in my past and what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And a couple of weeks ago, I stopped journaling and I started going a little bit backwards. And now I realise that journaling is a part of my recovery, and I have to keep journaling for the rest of my life. So I pray to God before I go to bed and pray every morning, and that's what's keeping me clean today.
Yeah. So you become very self-aware as well of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Tell me about the chapel and all the rest of it, because we have had people saying that when they first got to Dooralong, they'd never had a church background, and then Wednesday evening hits them, which is chapel night, and it's loud music and it's full on, and they think, hey, hang on, have I joined a cult? was it a bit like that for you?
Yeah, when I first got there, I was like, wow, what have I got myself into? But now I've realised that this is part of my recovery. I have to keep praying to my higher power, keep going forward with everything I'm doing. And Wednesday night, it's all good. All the boys and all the girls out there sing, and we get into it. Like, there's some people that sit up the back, and they're the ones that don't want recovery, and that was me at first. But now I realise I need to do this and keep my recovery going.
Yeah. So, and now you're quite happy to talk about Jesus and Christianity and God. It's part of your life now.
Yeah.
And you're
if it wasn't for God, I wouldn't be clean today.
Yeah, that's terrific. So you've been 6 months or more.
Yeah.
We'll break for some music shortly and find out what your hopes are for the future. But before we do that, how are things? If you don't mind me asking, you mentioned that you left home when you were 14. You'd had a big argument with your mum. Is your mum still in your life?
Yeah, today I have a good relationship with my mum, where when I was 14 I would not talk to them, wouldn't have a bar of them, but today I sit and can actually talk and sit down and have an actual conversation without me going off. But like, there's still going to have to be put boundaries in place. Like, I'm moving back to my mum's when I finish program, but she's the one that's keeping me clean as well. Like, she's one of my other higher powers, because she's the one that made me, and she was my rock when I was a kid, but now she's my rock now. Because if it wasn't for her, I probably would be back out in addiction as well, because she was the one that wanted me to be clean, and now I'm clean and she wants to be a part of my life, where when I was in addiction she brushed me away because she knew that I was in a bad way and I could have caused trouble, and she's just happy today that I'm clean and sober.
So you hadn't seen, or you've not been in regular contact and had a good relationship with your mum since the age of 14?
No.
And now, and how old are you, Sam, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 21 years old.
So at 21, did you ring your mum out of the blue and say, hey mum, this is Sam?
Yeah, I rang her when I got into the psychiatric ward and said, I got a problem, I'm on cannabis. But I didn't say I was on ice, because it was all through the paper, ice leads to this and this and this, and I thought, well, if I tell her that, I still had the denial there that I was only just on cannabis.
Yeah.
But when I put myself in the Dooralong Transformation Centre, that's when I started realising I need to tell Mum what I've been doing and what I have done wrong, you know. Like,
yeah. And things are, it's obviously a journey and bridges have to be built and all the rest of it, but things are looking positive on the family front.
Yeah.
So what are your hopes and dreams for the future? We talked briefly about your family and how things are looking good there, but what about yourself? You're only 21, got, got many years in front of you. What do you hope to do with your life, Sam?
Well, I just finished a Cert 2 in Community Services, and I'm hoping to go back to TAFE next year to do a diploma in Youth Services to help the youth out more than what there is on the street at the moment, because I started my addiction at a youth age, and I don't want to see young people go through the same thing that I've been through, you know. Like, I want to guide them in the right path instead of the path I went down.
That's terrific, yeah. And I think young people are going to take much more notice of a young guy like yourself, 21-year-old, particularly with your experiences, your lived experiences of what drugs can do, than somebody who's just my age or sort of just got the knowledge out of a book. I mean, you've lived that life, you know what it's like, so you'll be able to relate to young people in that way. Yeah,
well, I started realising that the age of drugs now is a younger age than what I started. Like, there's 12-year-olds starting smoking pot, but it's leading to ice now. Ice is just that easy to get on the streets, and it's leading to the path where I ended up.
So when you were sort of 14, it was mainly cannabis?
Yeah.
Yeah, but now you're saying that at that age...
It's the ice.
It's ice. Yeah. That's really scary, isn't it?
Yeah, well, for a young person at that age, how are they getting that money, and what are they doing to get that product?
Exactly. And their brain is still developing at that stage, and we were talking about, drug-induced psychosis. It does make you wonder what such a powerful drug like ice is going to have on their brains, their young brains. Yeah. So you've got brothers and sisters as well. How's life tracking with them? Have you re-established contact with them?
I've established a couple of contacts with them. I've just been keeping in contact with them a little bit because I don't want to make too much and then it falls out of place and I've stuffed up again.
Yeah, one step at a time.
Yeah, it's day by day.
Day by day, yeah. And your relationship with God, which you established whilst you were at Dooralong, this is going to be a continuing feature of your life?
Yeah, well, God's going to be in my heart for the rest of my life now, because that's what's keeping me clean, and that's how I start my day and end my day now. Yeah.
And what does your mum think of you now? I suppose we should have your mum here answering that question, but yeah, well, you tell us, what does she say about you?
Well, she says I'm a changed young man. Well, I went to my brother's wedding probably 3-4 weeks ago, and I sat down and actually had a decent conversation without yelling or screaming or swearing at her, and she understands what I've been through now, where when I first went in there, she's like, you don't need this, you can do it yourself, and I explained that I did have a problem and I can't fix it without help, and today she's proud of me and we keep talking.
And Christmas is on the horizon. Do you hope to be home with Mum for Christmas?
Yeah, I hope to have my first Christmas in 5 years with my family.
First Christmas in 5 years?
Yeah.
Where have all the other Christmases been? What about last year? Let's just take last year. What was Christmas like for you last year?
Well, I was in a place where I shouldn't have been, and I was doing the wrong things and was on the drugs hard.
Yeah, so there wasn't much joy at Christmas last year?
No, just a phone call, that was it.
Yeah, just a phone call.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, see you later.
Yeah. Pretty bleak, pretty miserable Christmas.
Yeah.
You must be looking forward to Christmas a lot this year.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Can't wait for Christmas. That's excellent. Look, Sam, it's been an absolute delight to talk to you this morning. You experienced a lot in your short life, but it's made you the more experienced and more self-aware person that you are, and you're trying to put something back and give back and help sort of young kids who are sort of perhaps starting off on that pathway, which is going to lead them exactly where it led you to, psychiatric wards or even worse. Yeah. So we just want to thank God for sort of intervening in your life. We just want to thank God for keeping you clean. We just pray God will sort of keep His Spirit over you and keep you clean, and that you go on to have a really fruitful experience with Him, and that you're able to do some of the work that He would want you to do with the kids, and not just on the coast, but wherever you are in the future. So
yeah, thanks Phil for having me on the channel today.
No, that's our pleasure. You've been listening to an encore presentation of the Dooralong stories, which can be heard live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. and repeated at 8 p.m. Sunday and 1 a.m. Wednesday, right here on 94.9 rema.cc.